Hi, my name is Carla Sabella, and I've been teaching for the last 18 years working with students on their writing. And what I'm going to do in this video is have a look at how to approach essay questions, which is such a common thing I get asked. So, how do you structure an essay? How do you start it? Like all of those things. So what we're going to do is I'm actually going to work with you on a particular essay question. It's fairly generic in the sense that it's more like an ethical based question rather than on like a particular, poem or story or novel or whatever. But I thought it would be a really great way to just have a look at, the overall approach that you can have in terms of addressing questions and essays. So the question we've got here is, being good is easy. What is difficult is being just. And then the question is, discuss this idea of justice, creating arguments for or against the statement. So I just want to start off talking about introductions quickly because obviously it's one of the most important parts of your essay because it's the first thing the marker reads. So it's got to really be on point and both answer the question and highlight the key ideas of your argument. Interestingly, introductions should be written last. And the reason for that is you really only fully clarify all of your points once you've actually created your argument and done your discussion. So contrary to what it sounds like, where you sort of introduce something and then maybe leave the details and or at the very least what your specific argument is to later in the essay, you actually need to make your full argument in your introduction. So the way I like to think of an introduction is to think of it as like the opposite of doing a maths question, right? So you get a question for maths, you do all your working out, and then at the end you get your answer. English is the total opposite. You have to start with your answer, and then your working out is what you write in your paragraphs. And in terms of having arguments in your introduction that match up with your essay, I should be able to see what your argument is going to be in your topic sentences matching up with what's in your introduction. So there shouldn't be anything really mentioned in your topic sentences. So topic sentence is the first sentence of a paragraph. There should be nothing in there that you haven't already mentioned in your introduction. And then once you come to your conclusion, it's just going to be pretty much like a more brief restatement of what you have in your introduction. But just to reiterate, you're not going to be, obviously you never add any new points for a conclusion. That's kind of obvious, but you never, you always have all of the points you're planning on discussing in your introduction, rather than sort of just skirting around the issue and then thinking, oh, well, I'll just give you my argument in my essay. No, you have to make your key points in the introduction itself. So if we have a look at this particular essay, this question, coming up with a couple of ideas is definitely the best way to start off, because you can't just start writing when you don't know what your actual ideas are going to be. All right, so if we have a look at this one, let's have a look at this first notion. And this is the other thing too, so you want to really break down the words of the question and see, so you can engage with what they're asking, okay? So being good, so here we're looking at good, bad, which is really looking at the idea of morality. Okay, so something that's good, bad, right, wrong. That's what that's looking at. Okay, and then is easy. So what's a synonym for that? So like simple, it's more than enough, straightforward. And these don't necessarily need to be words you're going to use in your actual essay, but it's getting your head around what the question's actually asking. What is difficult, so hard, complex, etc., is being just. Okay, so we've got fair is probably the best synonym there. Excellent. So then we're looking at, discussing this. So what I would start with is this particular part. Being good is easy. All right, so if we're looking at being good, what does being good actually mean? Good. Okay, so that could be being good could be following rules. which could be based on, you know, what parents say, what the law says, schools, you know, any particular institution or authority. So let's say following rules, particularly in place from authority figures. Okay, so that could be one notion of being good. Authority figures, that could even be religion. Yeah, so anywhere where there are guidelines on what it means to be good and bad. And see if you can think of other things, but that's a pretty good place to start. And then you've got being good is easy. Well, is it? And so what you'll notice right now is I'm starting to engage with this question, not necessarily the whole question all at once, but I'm taking the first half of the question and I'm going to see what sort of arguments I can come up with for that part, and then we can go to the second part. And that may end up being the basis of your actual structure of your essay. You might start with the first paragraph being, well, what is being good, and is that easy or difficult? And then what is being just, and then is that easy or difficult? And then obviously you're starting to develop your ideas in those particular frameworks. So you need to decide, is it easy or difficult? Well, it probably depends on the situation, right? So, you know, you could certainly make the argument. So, and this is where you can kind of do like points for and against. So points for the fact that following these rules could be easy is, you know, like, it's a hard one because again, you actually really need to also define what easy is. So easy is, as we said, like simple, straightforward. So like, and then you want to start using specific examples. Okay, so let's talk about something simple like road rules. Okay, so there are rules that are set out. You know, you may or may not agree with all of them, but, you know, the idea is they are designed to keep people safe and to have the road work. You know, so, you know, particular people need to stop so the other people can go. If people didn't follow the traffic light signals, then there would be chaos and there would be accidents and people would get hurt and all of these negative consequences. Okay, so that could be a point for, right? So we've got rules for the road, you know, are clarified, so they're made clear to us. And if we follow them, and so the fact that they're clarified or they're made clear to us, this makes them straightforward. So that's where you could make the argument that, you know, maybe that one's easy. And if we follow them, we can avoid chaos and accidents on the road. Okay, so that could be an argument, you know, for that particular point there. Okay, and then if we go to a point against, so, and this is where it gets a little bit interesting when we look at these styles of questions, because there's no real one answer. There's no one, there's not only one answer, right? So I'll give you a bit of a kind of moral gray, or a bit of a gray area, which is, you know, obviously we have a rule not to steal. And that's not only set about by, you know, the laws of society, but, you know, has been in quite in like religious doctrine, and, you know, it's always been sort of an agreed upon rule. However, then if you think about a situation where an individual needs to get medicine for their, you know, parent or child or, you know, other loved one, and they couldn't afford it, in that situation, well, I certainly wouldn't say that was easy. Being good or like following those rules would not be easy. And, you know, and in that point, like, that's a really good argument against that it's not easy, right? So it could be difficult to be good or follow rules in a situation where, you know, moral flexibility or compassion is required for example, and then always good to use examples. So for example, if a loved one requires medicine that you cannot afford. Okay, clearly that would not be an easy situation. But then we're also looking at the question of, well, is it bad to get that medication for that particular or loved individual if it is breaking a particular rule? So then we've got this question of, well, what is being good? Is that a bad thing to do that? And then certainly it's definitely not easy, right? So anyway, we've got quite a lot of things that you can go into. And so with that, you could start, you could kind of clarify that to be your paragraph 1, the basis of paragraph 1. And then obviously as it follows, paragraph 2 would be more likely to be something, it would be about the second part. So 2 being just is difficult, which, I mean, as we kind of continue on with this particular question, does sort of link into the previous conversation that we just had. So now, is it just to have to follow a rule or to let a loved one die if you're not able to afford the medication that they require? So that's where it starts getting, we start getting that like complexity coming into the argument. So what I would do is I would start by clarifying what being just is. Is it to be just? Okay, so you could, use things like dictionary definitions, etc. But actually, let's have a look at that. So justice, define just behavior or treatment. That's not overly helpful. All right, so based on or behaving according to what is morally right and fair. Okay, so we're still going back to this whole idea of like good and bad, right and wrong, etc. And can they be separated in that particular way? Right. So anyway, let's stick to the good part here. What is good? What is bad? Kind of going into where like it wouldn't be easy because we're following, if you're not following the rules, but then that links into the idea of actually, what is it to be just? And then is that difficult? And, again, you can go into the for or against. Okay. So perhaps it's very easy to be just in situations where, well, you can pick a situation where you think it's easy to be just. So for example, I don't know, somebody comes and robs a shop, let's say, and then they're brought to their court, and then we see the video surveillance of them doing it, and then they get sentenced or they get given a certain punishment for that. And there's so many levels of this, because then what punishment should they get? And then there's a lot of examples where that particular punishment does not really fit the nature of the crime, and then it also comes down to what can be proven. There's lots of different ideas in the justice system, and this is a particularly big issue at the moment in the States, where there's quite an inequitable justice system for African American people, and there's been quite a history of people not going to trial, just taking pleas even when they so there was nothing was proven about their guilt, yet they took a plea because the idea of being sentenced or being convicted was a lot worse. So they sort of people get threatened by the notion of, let's say, having 20 years in jail, so they'll take 2 years and never go to court, so that they then think they've saved themselves a potential 18 more years of prison time. Yet is that just because nothing, they never went to court, right? And a lot of these people would claim to be innocent. So that's another whole area you can talk about. But in any case, we're going back to something being quite black and white. And there are situations like that, I would say. And if we go back to the traffic and the road rules one, we've got this idea that if someone doesn't follow the rule, then they get a punishment. Okay, so if I go and park my car somewhere where it says no stopping and I get a ticket for that, then I would say that was just. from my perspective. Again, there's a lot of subjectivity here, but you could give that as an example. So, you know, where there are clear rules, you know, e.g. parking in a no stopping zone, would receive a, you know, consequence or a punishment such as a fine that would be considered just. However, against, if we go on that same argument, what if you parked in that no stopping zone because, you know, you had a wife who was in labor and you needed to, like, you know, take her into the emergency room or whatever it is, you know, like, so you, even in those like seemingly clear cut situations, like where are there points where we need to actually have some flexibility? So again, like, that's where you can sort of go, okay, well, yeah, it is difficult, right? So it's always depending on the situation. I suppose that's one of the key arguments that you would have, right? So what if you needed to park in a no stopping zone for an emergency? Okay, so this is just kind of gives you an idea of how you could structure a response like this, going into the depth of argument. And, you know, even just having like, and so once we've actually clarified these things, and I suppose what we're sort of getting at the end of the day is that there's no clear answer here, right? It's all situational, and human beings are subjective, and experiences and situations are all totally subjective. And that could ultimately be the argument that you come to, because when every single time we look at, you know, a particular scenario here, it's like, oh great, these rules are made clear to us, but then what about this other situation where, you know, you can't apply the same rules? And, you know, that's what we're sort of, and that's what your ultimate argument would be, right? So you know, coming back up to your introduction and what your overall statement is going to be, and what your approach here is going to be, it could be something like, you know, due to the, you know, inherently subjective nature of perspective, like human perspectives, behavior, and experiences, right? You know, they're so what are we saying here? We're sort of saying there's no one answer, right? There's no one size fits all response here. And we want to use some of the words of the question, right? So what we need to be doing is potentially either starting the sentence with something from the question, or maybe like just integrating it throughout, or whatever it is. So if we look at, due to the inherently subjective nature of human perspectives, you know, behavior and experiences, it can be argued that being good may be easy in particular situations, while being just may be difficult. However, there is no sort of clear or how do you say, like, fixed, probably no fixed answer towards whether being good or just is easy or difficult in every situation. It merely depends on the circumstances of the situation at hand. Okay, so that's a bit rough. And one of the things I want to sort of emphasize here is, don't worry about getting it perfect when you first start writing. Just start putting some words down, and then you can go on and start fiddling with it. Okay, and a really good technique you can use is actually reading your work aloud after you've written about it. So I've got here, due to the inherently subjective nature of human perspectives, behavior, and experiences, it can be argued that being good may be easy in particular situations, while being just may be difficult, you know, in others. However, There is, and this is where I could have played around with the wording a little bit and said, however, due to the inherently subjective nature of human experiences, there are no fixed answers towards whether being good or just is easy or difficult in every situation. It merely depends on the circumstances of the situation, Actually, I don't need to say at hand, that's a bit colloquial. Great. So can you see how, like, that after going through and scaffolding what the ideas were for these two parts of the question, what we ultimately concluded is that there is no fixed answer. There's not one way of approaching it or seeing it, and that's the argument. So once I've clarified those paragraphs, then I can go back and start writing an introduction that clarifies what my overall argument is going to be. So I'm going to leave it there. I'll let you play around with the rest of it, but hopefully you've gotten something out of that regarding how to break down a question, how to construct an argument, and how to write an introduction.